Okay, so I chose to do my project over mass incarceration, and why it is a huge issue in the United States and what we can do to solve that. So what is mass incarceration? In the 1980s and the 1990s, the United States began a tough-on-crime stance in politics, and this really magnified the war on drugs. The war on drugs started in 1971, but this tough-on-crime pressure that it added, it really turned into a snowball effect. According to the ACLU, currently there are 2 million people that are incarcerated. The United States only has 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the incarcerated population. We are incarcerating people far more than any other country is. So there are several issues that come with mass incarceration. I chose, to me, what seems the most devastating. There's a major racial disparity in mass incarceration. Blacks are being targeted and incarcerated at much higher rates than white people are. This is disproportionately affecting Black communities and devastating their communities. Families have also felt the effect of mass incarceration and have been torn apart. Children are losing parents, parents are losing children, brothers losing sisters. Deep wounds are being left, and people don't see these healing anytime soon. And this has a major effect on police relationships with the community. Another issue is that offenders' lives are being altered seriously upon release, and they have a hard time building their life, which leads to high rates of recidivism, which is supposed to be the opposite effect of prison. And also the incarceration rate, or the incarceration system, has begun to privatize because the cost of housing prisoners is becoming too high for the government to handle. And this is affecting the quality of life people have while being in prison. So to begin with the racial disparity, Black males are 6 times more likely than white males to be incarcerated. Also, you can compare that to 1 in 17 white males. That's 1 in 3 Black males can expect to go to prison, according to the Sentencing Project. Compare that to 1 in 17 white males. So there's a much higher chance of a Black male going to prison than a white male. That doesn't mean that white people are committing less crime. It just means they're not being caught, and they're not being imprisoned the same way Blacks are. So there was a study that kind of highlights this issue. In New Jersey, minorities made up only 15% of drivers on the New Jersey Turnpike. However, they made up 42% of stops and 73% of arrests, which just goes to show that they were really being targeted on this highway. The sad thing is we see glaring examples of this, like the Turnpike study or stop and frisk, which most people agree is unfair practice. But this is happening quietly all over. And the sad truth is that this doesn't just end up in prison. This starts with disproportionate police contact, and this also starts with racial minorities needing public defenders a lot more than white people do. With racial disparities, racial minorities making, on average, $20,000 less than white Americans, they're relying heavily on overworked and underpaid public defenders. The disparity also continues to trial itself and into sentencing. Racial minorities are judged and treated unfairly the whole step of the way, from the very start to the end. Disproportionately imprisoning Blacks also has a negative effect across the board. Families and children are missing and children are missing fathers and mothers, and they're being released without employment options or housing options. So what can we do to help end racial disparity in mass incarceration and in contact with the criminal justice system? There are programs like the Sentencing Project, which are important, and it's important that we support them. They help try to keep the criminal justice system accountable, because incarcerating Blacks at such a high rate, it's really unconstitutional. It also gives people and racial minorities, people that have lost their voice a long time ago, it gives them a voice, and it stands up for them. Educating people on their rights is also important. Rights when they're being searched, rights to an attorney, and rights to jury of one's peers. It's important to know those rights, because some people don't, and some people end up arrested because of it. So that's really important. And also it's important to educate the country itself. The media shows many stories of racial minorities being targeted by the police, being arrested, being violent, and it makes it seem like Black people and other racial minorities are committing so much more crime, but the truth is that they're not. So it's important to end the stereotyping and the misinformation. The family unit has also taken a major blow because of mass incarceration. In a study conducted in 2007, it found that 809,800 out of the 1,518,535 prisoners have children, leaving 1,706,600 children without one or both of their parents. That number is staggering. And we have not yet got to see the effects of how incarcerating so many parents is going to affect all these children. But what we do know is that people that have a father that is in prison have a higher chance of dropping out, a higher chance of getting substance abuse issues, mental illness, and their parents, and becoming homeless. So out of the 1.7 million children currently having parents in the United States prison system, 30% of them will follow in their parents' footsteps. So how do we help families? There are many resources that can help families that have an incarcerated parent or loved one close to them. Childwelfare.gov was just one of the resources that I found, and it had a multitude of resources listed on it. Just some general advice, and also places that they can go to get help. Another important resource is to put offenders in other programs when possible. Many of the people being arrested are on drug convictions, which are mostly nonviolent. So work release programs, treatment programs, and the Betty Ford Center are all really great resources to turn to. Work release keeps people at their job during the day, and then they come back at night. So it has some of the same structure as a jail or a prison, but lets the people stay employed. They don't have a gap in employment, and they keep experience, and they get to see their families. Treatment programs to get people off of drugs or alcohol and clean are helpful for the family and the offender, and could help lead them off of a path, of the criminal path they're on. Another important resource is the Betty Ford Center. It not only helps offenders with addiction problems, but it can also help families that are affected by somebody with a substance abuse problem. Most of the time, people don't know the emotional effects, or they look over the emotional effects that family have because of the offender and their substance abuse issues. So how offenders' lives are affected long term. Here I have a graph that shows callback, the percentage of callbacks that people get based on whether they're white or they're black and whether they have a criminal record or don't have a criminal record. And as you can see, even without a criminal record, it can be very hard for black people to get a callback from a job. And you add having a criminal record into that, it makes it hard for anybody to get a job, let alone somebody that is black. So some of the other things that I thought to highlight were becoming disenfranchised once you have a felony, the other impacts it has on job opportunity, housing limitations, and FAFSA exclusion. So here are the effects broken down. Once charged with a felony, offenders have been stripped of their right to vote. And because minorities are being imprisoned at much higher rates than white people are, a lot of the racial minority population has lost their right to vote. And this can have a large impact on elections and how our issues in the criminal justice system evolve and get better. Racial minorities' voices aren't being heard because they cannot vote. And that has a big impact on issues such as mass incarceration and solving them. Another huge issue for people that have been in prison is job opportunity. For people that have been incarcerated for a very long time, being released, it can be almost worse for them to be released than to be in jail or in prison because they have had such a long, real work experience gap that it's hard to get another job. They could not have computer skills. They could not have basic people skills. A lot of people leaving prison have PTSD, and it's hard for them to work around people because they're used to the defensive stance they have to have in prison, and it's hard to come down from that. Another really big issue is the box list, saying whether or not you're a felon. If you check it, you're most likely not going to get a call back, and if you don't and they find out, then you're untrustworthy. So that has been really detrimental, and I know that here in Kansas, there's been talk for some time now whether we should keep the box or get rid of the box, and I think that it's best that we get rid of this box so people at least have a fighting chance. It would give many, many people a fighting chance to at least get met in person. Another really big thing that a felony can affect is public housing. Public housing in Section 8, depending on your charge, you can never be eligible, and other times it's really hard. They don't want you to come into the neighborhood if you have a criminal record because they don't want crime brought into the neighborhood is kind of the thought. Also, it's hard to get financial aid from FAFSA, which if you're trying to better your life and it's hard for you to get a job, college might be the next best thing that you can do at the moment. And people that have drug convictions and sex offending convictions are ineligible for financial aid. And people with other convictions, it can be extremely hard to get financial aid. So even when you do try to better yourself, you're kind of just left to figure it out. They release you with very little resources most of the time. But here's how we can improve the quality of life for offenders upon release. Preparing for offenders for reentry, especially those that have been locked up for long amounts of time, is critical. Some states do not have any programs, while others work hard to give people tools that they need to be successful upon release. Some of these programs are learning a trade while in prison, getting counseling and anger management services, helping identify mental illness and treat it, halfway houses and work release, and schooling. Learning a trade while in prison can be extremely beneficial. Not only are you employed, but upon release, you have a skill that people need, a specialty skill. One of the skills they have is like culinary arts, welding, or carpentry, which are all things that are not only specialty, but are most likely going to get you more than minimum wage. Getting counseling and anger management services is also very important because it can help get you off a criminal path because it helps you deal with maybe some trauma in your past. Helping identify mental illness is also very important because many prisoners are mentally ill. And getting their illness under control could get their criminality in check also. Halfway houses and work release, a place where people can go upon release so that they have some structure They're not tempted to do the criminal things they did or contact people that they were in contact with before. Those are really important, and it can get them employment. Schooling is also extremely important and has been proven to lessen recidivism. So schooling is very important. Not just getting your GED, but they're also starting to get a lot more college courses in prison, which is extremely helpful and has now been proven to lessen recidivism. Privatization of the prison system is also another really harmful thing. As the number of prisoners skyrocketed, so did the cost to house them. The government is currently spending $63.4 billion a year to house the 2+ million prisoners that are in our prison system. That, in some states, is $60,000 a year per person. That is more than people are making working full-time with children. So the solution, some believe, was to privatize prisons. It was projected to reduce prison spending by about 20%. However, that has not been the case. A study conducted by the Bureau of Justice Assistance found that privatization only lowered the government spending on prisons by about 1%, and that 1% was mostly on cheaper labor. They were paying the prison guards and the corrections officers less, and that resulted in less spending. Why privatization is harmful? The United States government has a constitution to uphold, and private prisons are not held to the same standard as the state and federal prisons are. Just because somebody is an inmate doesn't mean they deserve to be treated poorly. There should be a quality of life that they should get that can't be guaranteed in private prisons. Also, private prisons are driven by the prospect of monetary gain. For-profit attitudes leads to cutting corners for greater profit at the expense of the inmate, and that's wrong. There's also the fear that the government could eventually lose control of the correction system. Private owners are not familiar with what it takes to run a prison, and they are not knowledgeable of the needs of inmates, especially those with individualized needs, such as people with mental illness or disabilities. So by them not getting what they need in prison and specialized programs, they're going to be released even worse off than they are now in federal and state prisons. So the solution to privatization, the most obvious and the most cost-effective answer for eliminating the need for privatization is to decrease the amount of incarcerated people. Without the huge surge in prison population, there is no need for people to run prisons for profit. The goal of prison is to deter people from committing crime. Part of reaching that goal is giving people the skills they need to thrive in society. And the chances of an offender getting those kind of programs they need in private prisons is slim to none. Operators of private prisons are doing so for monetary benefit, not for the good of the community and not to lower recidivism, because they're making money on people going to those prisons. The owners of private prisons capitalize on the misery of others. Clearly, mass incarceration is a huge problem here in the United States, and I believe that if more people should really be knowledgeable about it and cry out about it, because it is affecting everybody. But I think that there really are some steps that can be taken to curb the issue and to make sure that those that really deserve to be in prison are the only ones that are in prison.